All right, let's deploy Flowdash on-premise using Aptable. Here we are in the GitHub on-premise repo for Flowdash on-premise. So let's get started by cloning the repo. Sample. I'm just going to clone this. I'm going to use SSH since I've added my key here, but you will most likely use HTTP to clone. It's an implementation detail. Okay, so we've got it. Let's CD into there. And this recording sort of expects that you've already configured the Apptable CLI and add an SSH key to your account, connecting your machine to your account. So once you've done that, you should be able to run Apptable from your terminal and get some output. Okay, so in this repository, we've got a few important files. We've got the README that we're looking at right now with the set of instructions which will follow. We've got the Docker file that is going to be our image on which our web and worker services run on a single app in Apptable. Those will be configured in terms of startup commands by the proc file. And Apptable.yaml is going to run pre-release commands, namely database migrations. So when you update your on-premise instance, and you'll do that by running a git push Apptable master, that is going to run any migrations available in whichever version specified in the Docker file. So if you keep it at latest, you'll pull the latest version of the image and run any available migrations. So let's get started. We're going to start off by creating a few resources. First things first, let's create the app. But before we do that, this is going to set some environment variables, this giant command here. These are all environment variables that are important for our app to be configured properly and for deploy to be successful. So just going to copy that and paste that into a text editor over here for when we're ready, because we're going to plug in values here as we go along. So first things first, let's create a new app, which will be this command. So Apptable create, we'll give it a name. It should say on-prem app. All right, so I'm going to copy this actually because we're going to use that later when we run this command, and just plug that in there. Okay, next we're going to create a database, Postgres database. We got to give that a name too. Call it on-prem PG for Postgres. This is going to take a second, so I'll pause. All right, it looks like that was successful. And we see the return value here is the connection string that we're going to plug in for database URL, the environment variable here. Now let's create a Redis instance. Copy this command. Give it a name. Call on-prem Redis. And again, I'll pause while Apptable works. All right, so that finished. Again, we're going to copy the connection string, plug that into the Redis URL variable here, and we're getting close to being done with environment variables. You can see this Apptable private registry username. We need to set that to the Docker Hub registry repository to which you should have access in order to pull the image specified in the Docker file here, the base image. What I've done is I've just set these as environment variables in my terminal, something like this, my username. But I've set those already, and I'm just going to reference them here. just to protect the old sensitive infos. All right. Last resource we're going to configure for this demo is an AWS bucket with a user and policy. This is so we can create and read files in your Flowdash instance. So let's assume you've already created an S3 bucket called, let's call it Flowdash-data. And maybe the region is US East 1. And finally, we're going to need to create a user that can access that bucket in the ways that we would like. So I'm here in the IAM management console. I'm going to add a new user. Let's call it Apptable user. I'm going to give that user programmatic access. I'm going to actually create a new policy. And go ahead and choose JSON over here because we've added the exact JSON that you're going to need here. So just copy and paste and make sure this Flowdash data here matches the bucket name that you specified and already created. So let's finish creating the policy. Let's call it on-prem Apptable S3 policy and create. Great. Let's search for it here when we attach it to the user. So you may have seen I got an error in the last user creation. It's because I was referencing a stale policy that I had deleted previously. So here's actually the new policy. Let's continue and create. Okay, so the important things here that we'll need is the access key ID, which we'll copy and plug in here, as well as the secret access key, which I'll copy. It's here, and then delete after this video. Okay, some last configuration that we'll need is Google Oauth. There are two ways to sign into Flowdash today. It's a username and password, which will actually require an email setup, which is specified down here. Check that out for more details. You just need a valid SMTP provider and some more variables set in here. You can also create users and log in via Google Oauth. And for that, you'll need to go into your Google Cloud instance and enable whatever we create as an endpoint to access the Oauth instance in Google. But for now, I'm going to use a fake client ID. Again, you can access this in your Google Cloud instance. Fake secret. Okay. And I'll talk about this later, but when we create a new endpoint to expose the app to the internet, that's what we'll use in the Google Cloud instance. Okay, so we are ready to basically run this command. So I'm just going to copy this, paste it here. Okay, so it's been configured successfully. And now the next thing to do is to add Apptable as a remote. And this is how we're going to deploy to Apptable. So if we actually go back up here, when we created the app, some of the output was a remote that we can add. So let's go ahead and do that. So git remote add, let's call it Apptable here. And we're now ready to deploy the app. So let's push full master. And again, this is going to take a moment, so I'll pause. All right, it looks like the schema was loaded into the database and the app was deployed. All right, a couple of final things here. Let's expose the app to the internet. So we're going to go into our Apptable dashboard here, check out the app that we just created. Again, we have 2 services running right now, a worker and web. Let's go ahead and expose web to the internet. Again, choose your service, make sure it's web here. It's important that the container port is 8000. That reflects what we specified in the Docker image that we pulled from. And feel free to configure this as you wish. We'll save the endpoint. It's going to take a minute to provision. But what we're going to do next is set just one more environment variable, which will be Apptable config set app is on-prem app. And we're going to call this is reflected in the README as well, settings host URL. And this is important for a few different parts of the app, especially if you want to do email. In order for your email buttons, for example, to route to the correct place, you're going to want to have this set. So let's copy, and we're not going to run this until we finish provisioning. So I'll pause again. All right, it looks like our endpoint is done being provisioned. So let's execute that command, which is going to set the variable and restart the containers. And once more, this is going to take a second. All right, so we started some new containers and we set the endpoint properly. So we should be able to copy and paste this. And here we are. We're running Flowdash on premise. One thing to note is, again, you won't be able to sign in with Google here. You have to go into your Oauth client and the developer console, Google Cloud Platform, and set this as a valid redirect URI. But apart from that, you should be up and running. And now to pull updates, we'll effectively do what we just did. And once a new tag has been, new version of the latest tag has been released to our Docker image, you'll be able to git push Apptable master, and that will run any pending migrations and restart the app with the latest version of the code. All right. Thanks for listening.